I'm Stella Collins, and I'm chairing this really interesting and what looks like a fully packed session today, so that's fantastic. We've got some really interesting speakers. We've got 2 different topics we're going to cover. I'm going to introduce them now briefly, and then they will introduce themselves again a little later. So we've got Dr. Alison Maitland and Laura Pelling from Lane 4, and they're going to explain why Lane 4 is called Lane 4. And then we've got also Amy Brann, author of, I've forgotten the name, Neuroscience for Coaching, and the other one, Amy? Make Your Brain Work. For some reason, that one never sticks in my head. So I know we're going to have a really interesting and interactive session. What I'd like you to do first, to improve your learning, to help you learn, if anyone was in the keynote this morning, they'll remember that there was talk about, linking to what you know, linking to what motivates you. So just spend a minute each talking to the person next to you, telling them why you're in this session and what you want to get out of it. So 2 minutes, one each. So hopefully you've now all woken up those networks, those neural networks. You've got some spaces to start dropping new ideas into. So I'm going to hand over to Laura and Alison.
Thank you very much. I'm really excited to be here today. We at Lane 4, basically, we're really excited because, sorry, Alison.
Yeah, can I pick up? Yeah, so we're really excited to be here today to actually talk to you about the neuroscience of learning. It's going to give you a little bit of an insight into Lane 4, aren't you, Laura?
Yes, so sorry about that. Yes, basically, I'm really excited because I'm really interested in how we create great learner journeys that actually really make the world where people come to work really interesting.
Yeah, and if I want to introduce myself, so I'm here today. Laura's our commercial director. She's very interested in, she calls herself a pseudo-learning professional, I think, don't you? Yeah, she keeps me on the straight and narrow and makes me make things quite simple to me. She comes from a marketing background. I'm actually an applied psychologist, and I'm here today. I'm not a neuroscientist, but my job at Lane 4 is to take really complex science and try and make it quite simple, so to boil it down, and then what I do with that is try and make it into Lane 4 product or into tools that you can all use with your teams, as individuals, with leaders, to try and make a difference to people's performance in your organisation.
Yeah. And I am not a scientist, so I have to come clean on that fact. But I am keen. So, Lane 4 then, it was set up 20 years ago by the gold medalist swimmer Adrian Morehouse, and he won his gold medal in Lane 4, hence Lane 4. Ah, you see? And we like to take the lessons from psychology, from elite performance, and from business, and use those for learning and development for managers and for leaders, and also to help organisations through transformation. But yesterday I went to this session on virtual reality and augmented reality, and they talked about the continuum from reality to virtual reality. And I want you to take sort of one step on that continuum today, because we are going to be in a gallery, okay? And this gallery is beautiful and modern. It's not really like this room at all. It's large and colourful, and you're right in the middle of the atrium, okay? Alison and I are your guides. And we're going to visit a number of rooms today. The first one, I, as the non-scientist, am going to take you into the neuroscience room. And we're going to talk about some of the things that are basic around neuroscience. Alison is going to take you into the body room, and we're going to talk about the connection between the body and the brain. Very exciting. Then we head off to the Sherlock Room, and this is where we get into mind palaces. You're going to love the mind palaces. Like all good galleries, our gallery has a cafe, and that's when you're going to have an opportunity to sit on your tables and talk to each other about what you've taken from the session so far. Then, and I know you can barely hold your excitement, we move into the bingo hall, where we've got an opportunity to do a quiz. There will be a quiz with prizes, high-quality prizes eventually. All galleries have a shop. We're not going there today, but just to give you the layout, there's our shop. All right, so now that's our sort of one step along the virtual reality journey. So first of all, then, we're into the neuroscience room. And really, there are three things. Obviously, I'm not a neuroscientist, so the things that really help me is to understand the definition of neuroscience. And the key thing really is to understand that neuroscience is not psychology. Okay, neuroscience is the study of the nerves and the nervous tissue as they relate to behaviour and to learning. And there are three things that I found quite helpful. The first one is that your brain, your brain has got 86 billion neurons in it. Now, as a non-scientist, I work that out by having 10 neurons for every person in the whole wide world, and still having some left over. So that's the scale of the number of neurons in your brain. The second thing is that the connections between those neurons change throughout your lifetime. So they strengthen, they weaken, they can be removed. And we call that neuroplasticity. Okay, so your brain is changing all the time. And the third thing, which is particularly exciting for me, is that you can actually develop new neurons through your lifetime. So we used to think that that was something that happened very early on in life. But actually, new neurons can be developed throughout your lifetime. And that's called neurogenesis. Okay? So the overarching thing I want you to think about is that your brain is a hugely dynamic thing. And obviously, our job as learning professionals is to make sure that we harness the power of that dynamic part of the body. Now, what I've learned and what Alison is drumming into me is some things that not all neuroscience is good science, okay? Now, the reason for that is that neuroscience is a relatively new thing. It's a relatively new area of study. And what that means is that actually a lot of it is focused on three things. It's focused on the developing brain, it's focused on the aging brain, and focused on brain injury. And those three things are not necessarily relevant to the adult learning brain. So when you're looking at neuroscience, it's really important to check the relevance. The second thing is that neuroscience... Second thing is... I forgot what the second thing is.
Me too.
The second thing is that people like me try and simplify it. And that was the second thing. And so that's really important that when you're looking at it, you actually try and dig into the science behind it, because it might be oversimplified and might not actually be quite that relevant. So as we leave the neuroscience room, a little bit of an introduction to the dynamism of the brain, and then just a few words of caution when you're looking at neuroscience as a non-neuroscientist. Alison. So now we're going to go into the body room, and Alison's going to talk about the connection between the body and the brain.
Thanks, Laura. Lovely. Okay, so I want you to stay here with us on our virtual journey. So imagine you've walked out of the foyer and you're now in the body room. We've all got a body. And we tend to think that neuroscience is all about the brain. But actually, I'm going to introduce you to the fact that the body is really involved in what we need to know about neuroscience. And our minds are linked to our body, and actually our body has a role to play in terms of how we think about learning.
Okay, so thinking about then the body and the connection, can you tell me a bit more about the neuroscience?
Yes, okay. So some people like to think that actually we have another brain. And you might be surprised to know that hidden right in the walls of our digestive system, we actually have 100 million neurons stuck in there. And scientists sometimes call that the second brain. It's actually, if you want the scientific name for it, it's our enteric nervous system. And what our second brain, it can't lead a team, it can't actually make complex decisions, but if you've ever gone with your gut, that's your enteric nervous system talking to your big brain, your brain up here, sending some signals via the vagal nerve, which also controls and regulates some of our emotional state. But what I want to talk to you today is not that bit of the brain, but actually I want to talk to you about something called embodied cognition. That's about using our perceptual and our motor systems to enhance how we think. And if I give you a really simple example of embodied cognition, it would be using my fingers to count. Yeah? I'm using my body in a way to enhance my thinking. It's a really simple example of embodied cognition.
So what does that mean for L&D then?
Okay, thank you. Good question. You see, I primed her earlier. You can tell that, can't you? Okay, so what neuroscience tells us is that action, movement, and gestures can enhance our learning and enhance our thinking. And if we take just one of those, let's just take gestures. So I'm here busy already, waving my arms around here in the room. All of us as L&D professionals, we know that we have to communicate complex ideas and concepts to our learners in terms of what we're doing. And if we think about gestures, we know also we have a better memory for things if we're active in it rather than if we learn it. And what neuroscience is now telling us that if we add gestures into our thinking, we can really deepen somebody's understanding of it. Because what gestures do, they have a visual part to it. You can see me waving my arms around. Yeah, they also simulate action. So I'm talking to you, I'm coming away from you. Yeah, and they also can do some things about helping you to understand non-verbal thought.
Okay, so can you give us a practical example then?
I can. All right. So let's take building relationships. One of my favourite topics as a psychologist. I have to do that a lot with athletes that I work with. We know that building relationships is quite complex. We know it's about interactions with people. So if I'm building a relationship with Stella, I have an interaction. It will change over time. It will depend what we do and so on. See, I'm already gesturing, aren't I? Yeah. So what I could do is I could show you a little picture of that. I might put that in my training course. And you might understand that one of the basics of relationships is about people connecting and disconnecting. But what I can do is deepen your understanding of that by showing there are two people here, and what people do is they come together and they make a connection by their interaction. Yeah, I'm interacting, and they come apart and they disconnect. That's another example of embodied cognition.
Lovely.
So we're going to leave the body room, and I want you to remember it's not just the mind that's involved in our learning. You can also involve the body. And whether you're working with face-to-face facilitators or whether you're doing a digital animation, remember the power of the body in developing your learning.
Super. So now we head off to the Sherlock Room, and we're in the world of mind palaces. Alison.
Okay. So have you walked out? I hope you've walked out the body room. We're now in the Sherlock Room. You can imagine Benedict Cumberbatch here. Well, I like to anyway. There we go. Messing up here. Okay. So we know that modern learning, I'm sure you've seen it on all of the stands out there. You know that modern learning is not just a single learning event. We don't just do a course now. We bolt all sorts of bits of learning together. They could be digital, they could be face-to-face, could be learning lockers, it could be all sorts of things that come together. And we know that learners have to be able to make sense of all of that to be able to take that back into the workplace and actually have sustainable learning over time. And at Lane 4, what we call that, when we put all those pieces of a blended learning journey together, we call it a learning journey. I've just said it. Yeah, we call that a learning journey.
So what is the neuroscience behind a learning journey then?
Okay, so I'd like you to remember 3 things about a learning journey. The first one is remember the power of visual. So our brain has an amazing ability to actually hold on to visual memories. But also what the neuroscience tells us is the brain can also process an image really, really quickly. So a brain can take in an image, an entire image, in just 13 milliseconds. And if you want me to put that into context, if you blink at me, do you all blink at me? Yeah, that's taking you about 100 to 400 milliseconds. So just remember the power of visual as you're building a learning journey. The second thing is think about using stories in your learning journey. Yeah, brains like stories. Stories engage many aspects of our brains, and they can also help you link together different elements of a story. And that's true whether you're doing a story that you're verbally telling or whether you're actually putting together a digital story. And then the third thing, and that's why we're here, is remember to harness the knowledge of Sherlock.
So go on then, tell us about harnessing Sherlock.
Okay. So, hands up, who's actually ever watched the Sherlock Holmes stuff? Oh, amazing, yeah, you love him too, like I do. Okay. So Sherlock Holmes, surprisingly or not, used learning journeys. You're probably going, oh, what's she barking or something? Well, yes, he did. What he did, he used a technique called a mind palace. It's actually something borrowed from the Greeks. It's not new. It goes back thousands of years. And what he does, you remember those scenes in the Sherlock series where suddenly images and things flash back. And what he does, he links clues and content and ideas to locations. And he brings all of those together to solve his crime. He's using the technique of a mind palace. And what we've done is created a mind palace for you. You've been in a gallery. We took you into the first room where you met us. So you remember in the foyer you met Laura and I. Yeah, we took you into the neuroscience room. You learnt some of the basics of the brain. Took you into the body room. Yeah, you learnt to know that actually you need to think about the body to enhance people's learning. And now we're in the Sherlock room where you're understanding the power of having a visual learning journey, having stories in our learning journeys, and then also thinking about Sherlock and our mind palaces.
So can you give us a practical example?
I can. So here behind me, hope you can see over my head. Yeah. 2 examples of mind palace. We work with our learning management system provider, Digits. They have something called the Journey Builder tool. But you can see there's 2 mind palaces there. And what that does, it enables you to combine the visual, the storytelling, and the mind palace to help learners link their content to the journey that they're going on. It's a really simple, really engaging, really intuitive way for them to actually walk through their learning journey, make sense of it, and also remember it. So as you leave the Sherlock room, I want you to remember the power of the visual, the stories, and the mind palace.
Lovely. So we're now in the cafe. This is your chance. So we're going to, now you're in the cafe, you're social on the table, we're going to give you a couple of minutes to talk to the person next to you and to think about what you've heard in the body room and what you've heard in the Sherlock room and how you might be able to come up with one thing that you might be able to use back in the office. Okay?
Okay. Yep. Can we call you back into the room? I know that's not very long. Woo. Yeah. Oh, I like it. Thank you, Stella.
Thank you.
Guys, if you can wind up your conversation, I know that's a brief nanosecond. Obviously, in a normal learning session, we'd have lots more time to explore things and so on.
So now, having left the cafe really too briefly, we're going to move into the bingo hall, okay? Now, in the bingo hall, we're going to learn about reward, okay, because that's what bingo halls are all about. But first of all, we're going to run our quiz, okay? Now, it is a competition. We love a quiz at Lane 4. Obviously, imagine all those sort of ultra-competitive people. And we're going to give you 4 questions which you can work on your table, okay? They're very simple questions, but you're going to have to be fast. It's like 45 seconds. But there is a prize, okay? I know, no expense spared, and really not very healthy, so not actually brand compliant. So, okay, so everybody ready? You've got an answer pad on your table, okay, a bingo hall piece on your table, which has got your
There's
questions.
one of these, you need this. There's one on the table.
All right. You ready? Right, okay, so at the click of the button, the questions are going to come up, okay? Ready, steady, go. You've got 45 seconds. Right, so now I'm going to give, this is a trust quiz, okay? So I'm going to give you the answers. So how many neurons in your brain? 86 billion. What is the brain's ability to adapt? It's called neuroplasticity. What is the scientific name for our bodies helping us to think? Is embodied cognition. Yeah. And the final one, how fast can the brain process? 13 milliseconds. So can we... 13. Right, so can the tables who got it right stand up? 4 right? Very good.
Okay.
Very good.
Okay.
Congratulations.
So shall I pick that up? Okay, if you'd like to just sit down a second. Fantastic. At the moment, those tables have won a prize. Yeah, we've got 5 minutes, so we have to work quickly now. Yeah, so what we've done, no surprise, you're all L&D people, you know this, we've actually just done a little bit of reward in there. Yeah, we know that learning games, simulations, yeah, we use the power of reward to actually motivate learners. You've used badges, I'm sure, and points in learning management systems and so on. So what we've done, we've activated your lovely reward system in your brain, a nice little kick of dopamine, some nice feel-good emotions, but also we know that through neuroscience helps us speed up our rate of learning. Now the problem is, if we do that too often, or if you were to expect there to be a reward, guess what? Clever old brain stops doing that, and we lose the power of that reward.
So we're going to up the ante. For the tables that got 4 right, we're going to play double or quits. You could keep your fantastic chocolate bars. I know that's tempting. Or you could have a chance to win one of 3 copies of Stella's excellent book. Okay? So you've got to make the choice. Are you going to double or quit? Go on, go for it. What are you going to do? Chocolate bar versus learning.
Okay, so who wants to keep the chocolates? Hands up.
Chocolates?
Okay.
Okay. So the whole uncertain reward thing hasn't worked here. Okay.
Okay. So everybody else who got the 4 questions right, you're in the game now for the last question, the final question with the chance to win one of these 3 books. Are you up for that? Yeah.
So I'm going to read this question out because it's a little bit more complicated because it's about the learning outcome. So as we left the Sherlock Room, Alison asked you to take away 3 things, right? 1 is the power of the visual. So I've given you 1. Can you name either of the other 2? Okay, and write it down, write it down. Right, okay. Has everybody got something written down?
Hey guys, come back into the room.
So the answer to that is either mind palaces or stories. Everybody got that? Yay!
Yay.
Right. We have winners. So write your names on the back of the bingo hall piece and an email address, and we will draw 3 and send out a copy of Stella's book to those 3 people. All right?
Okay, so let me just wrap up and just share a little bit of the neuroscience of what we've just done with you. So, as I said, the problem is with that reward mechanism, it can get too flat. We can get used to it all the time. And some recent neuroscience research with a project called the Synapse Project with Manchester Met and Bristol universities, and some other research now on adult learning, is showing that if you add uncertain reward in there, you can then reignite that dopamine. So the dopamine levels go up between the time when you anticipate the uncertain reward. You got all excited, didn't you? Yeah, we could hear it in the room. The dopamine goes up, the brain gets excited, you're more open to that faster rate of learning between the time you think you're going to get the uncertain reward and then when the outcome is, irrespective of whether you are successful or not in that outcome. So, and what we've done, we know that there are kind of 3 broad conditions that you need to apply to that. The first thing is that the reward has to be more than you expected. So you didn't come in here expecting anything. And then we ramped that up to say you could win one of Stella's books, so you had something more exciting, not for all of you, than a chocolate bar. Yeah, it doesn't work all the way. You have to sort of work this. Secondly, there's some uncertainty in there, so we gained the winnings. You were going to lose everything, or you might have the chance to win it. So again, that gets that dopamine going in your body. And the third thing is there was some influence of other people. So you were in a room, you were on teams. There's that social interaction there, which again has an impact on the dopamine level. So as you leave our final room here, which is our bingo hall, I want you just to remember the power of uncertain reward in terms of building and engaging learning for your learners.
So, we will be on the Digit stand over lunchtime if you'd like to talk to us anymore. We've got copies of our white papers available on that stand. Obviously, we've really just scratched the surface in 25 minutes. But we have got more detail, much more detail about the science of learning and development if you'd like to come and pick up one of those. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Laura and Alison. And I'm going to hand straight over to Amy, who is going to explore some more neuroscience with you. And I definitely think you're going to be getting people involved again.
I imagine that you have arrived with particular outcomes that you want to leave with. And I feel disappointed already that we probably won't meet all of them. But I do want you to leave with a very practical approach, a tool to synergize, to bring together all of these amazing insights that you're taking from all of these different sessions. I've been going to these sessions and I've been noticing themes, and I've been hearing about creating a learning culture and hearing about how values are important, hearing about how AI is coming and what that means for us. And this theme that is really strong, which really excites me with my background, is that being human is still on the agenda and is really critical that we understand what that means. And for me, neuroscience is the discipline that teaches us all about what's going on in here. How many of the people you work with have one of these? Oh, yeah. Okay. And so neuroscience, while it is not perfect, and while not all of the masses of research are going to be applicable to what you do day to day, there is weekly insights coming from this field that have got practical implications for you guys to help you do your jobs better. So we're going to just chunk up and think around what we can play with and how we can start intentionally gathering more insights to practically shape what we're doing. So I'm hoping you get to work on something that's actually important to you in this session. I said that I wanted to talk about AI in this session because it is massively exciting, and it's definitely coming, and it's arrived in some guises. And for me, again, from a neuroscience perspective, understanding how we work and how brains work becomes even more critical and timely as your organization moves on and changes. And so the things that you can do today and as you go back into your organizations and that you can plan for the coming months, I think are even more time critical with technology advancing as it is. And I think from all the neuroscientists that we're connected with, at this point in time, we don't understand enough about this to replicate this. So I think it's probably been said elsewhere, but you're not tomorrow going to have a conversation or an interaction. The best brains in the world don't know how consciousness works yet. We don't really have a full grasp of emotions, so you're in no danger of something mimicking this tomorrow. But that doesn't mean that we don't need to be prepared for understanding all of the things that are making this and us uniquely human, and then developing those and paving the way for those to really shine in your organizations so that the technology can complement but is not a competitor at this point. Okay, so I want to invite you to think about something you want to improve in your organization. In a moment, we're going to work on tables, and so you might split into two groups, you might stay as one big group. You've got a couple of pieces of paper, and I want you to think about this one thing that you want to improve, one result that you want to see occur, perhaps in the next year or so. And if you're really stuck, go with innovation, because every company we work with wants more innovation in there. Does anyone want less innovation? Their people to be less innovative? No, okay, so if you need a fallback, fall back onto innovation. And for the first iteration, it's just a first draft, I want you to imagine you're learning designers and create an intervention or a series of interventions, some ideas of how you can get towards that result. And I want you to be free in your thinking. So you're aiming for this result, be free in your thinking in how you get there. And I'm going to give you 7 minutes. First draft, 7 minutes. Thank you for pausing and coming back together so promptly. You guys are brilliant. Okay, so I've had a wander around, and some of you have got really nicely articulated sort of goals, results that you're aiming for. Some, I'm not entirely sure what they mean, but so long as you do, then that's a good thing. And we're going to come back to them in a short while. But before we do, I want to introduce sort of our approach. And as is typical, we've given it a silly name. Well, it's slightly silly. It's called the beautifully simple model that gets results. It's dead simple, but people that use it tell us that they see how deep you can go into it. And using our embodied cognition, I'm gonna just try something. So I want you to all sort of point up. So this is our result. So if you point up for our result, and then come down here, and this is our behavior, and then over here is our environment. Okay, so however you want to visually represent that on your paper, just those three components. I do three circles with a little line that joins them, but you can do it however you want, squares, hexagonal shapes. And the idea is that you start with the result. And you guys have started with the result. You started talking about how you would get to that result. But I want to layer on some of the approaches that we use that we then turn to behavioral science and neuroscience to flesh out. So this behavioral component, we know that behaviors drive results. Does anyone want to challenge me on that? I'm always up for a challenge, but is it a fair assumption that behaviors are important in getting to results? Yes. Anyone still awake? Yes. Okay, so behaviors are important in getting to results. So we want to articulate the behaviors. We want to be really clear on what behaviors we're looking for from people to create the results. And I'll give you a couple of examples in a moment. Then this environment piece, we've talked about the room that we're in today, and we've talked about the way we're sitting, or we can think about how the way we're sitting influences our behavior. Our environment is critical. Anyone go to the nudges talk the other day? A few of us. Okay, nudges are amazing, and they utilize different biases within our brain. They often utilize our hot network from a neuroscience perspective rather than our cold network. And our hot network is very influential in our behaviors. So if we tried to run this session in a lecture-style theatre, obviously we wouldn't have got anywhere near the lovely engagement that you guys have had sitting on your round tables. But it's exactly the same in any environment your workers are in. And I think sometimes we pay more attention to the systems, the tech that they're engaging with, rather than the environment that they're in that's going to nudge the behaviors that's going to create the results. So I want to raise up the profile of our external environment to influence our hot network to drive behaviors, typically unconsciously, that get particular results. So I want that to be on your agenda. Whenever you're creating any learning intervention, whenever you're thinking, how do I get a result from people, you've got to think about, or you're missing an opportunity if you don't think about, what's the external environment that these people are in. So that's the external environment, but environment's obviously got two components to it, because our internal environment is hugely influential as well. And for some of you, you may have come here thinking, well, I want people to be more connected in our organisation. I want more collaboration. I want more generative ideas to be shaped through these interactive processes. And I would invite you to consider what internal environment will help shape those behaviours. There's a particular neurochemical that would be very useful to be being released. Does anyone want to buzz in? Yeah, oxytocin. Oxytocin's a fantastic chemical, and a lot of these conferences, this conference has got some great opportunities to help people release oxytocin. And earlier when we were laughing, not only were we releasing more dopamine and helping to focus our attention, but we were also releasing oxytocin because we were getting to know each other a little bit, we were laughing together, and we were being in close spaces. Some of these things can help release oxytocin, which can do so many different things, including, sort of at the far end, help us be better mind readers. We're more empathetic, we're more in tune with other people when we're releasing more oxytocin into our bodies and to our brains. So thinking about the internal environment you need in order to nudge these behaviours, create these behaviours, and then get the result, I think is a really solid approach that honours the humanness of us and helps us stay connected with these really core learning principles that sometimes it's really easy to get distracted away from. This morning from the keynote, we had some really core, stable, research-underpinned insights. But when we're in the day-to-day work, it's easy for those to sort of perhaps fall out of our head a little. So in a moment, I'm going to invite you to go back into your groups and, using this beautifully simple model, the results, the behavior, the environment, flesh out your ideas. Make sure you're clear on what behaviors you're needing to see, and think then about the environments, internal and external environments you want to create. And I'll just give you a couple of ideas of how some of the organisations we've worked with have seen this play out. One of my favourites involved me lugging a seesaw to every face-to-face, I know, don't judge them, face-to-face session that we did. And I'd have this seesaw and I'd be talking to them. They wanted to raise innovation in their organisation, and they were one of your classic big finance companies, so not typically known for, or necessarily as accountants praised for, their creativity. But we were talking to them about the different networks in the brain that are activated in the creative process. So you probably know creativity is not just one thing. It doesn't just happen in one moment. You can see some nods. They're encouraging. Keep going. But that we have different processes in creativity and different networks that are activated during those. And actually getting these people to recognize that sat at your desk in your little cube was not likely to free up bottom-up generative thinking, because it's this seesaw. Either you have the lower regions of your brain generating these new insights, or you have more top-down activity utilising the prefrontal cortex that's great and you need it, but not when you're trying to iterate and come up with different lateral thinking and pull different ideas together. So getting them to realise that you could either have one network or the other network active at one point in time meant that then they looked at some of their behaviours and thought, yeah, it's okay to leave the desk. It's okay to go outside. And I remember after one session we did, a guy from a big lovely retail shop called me up and he said, Amy, I can't believe it. I thought my team were just getting a bit useless. He said, but I took them out of the office for a meeting and they came up with great ideas. And we laugh, and maybe you guys do it all the time, and I'm talking to the converted, but sometimes going back to basics and looking at what result we want, what behaviours we want to see, and then actually, well, what's going on in the brain at that point in time? What do we want to create the environment in the brain? Makes it much more likely that we see those behaviours. And it didn't cost, well, it cost him coffee, but it didn't cost him much to take them out of the office and to get all of these amazing ideas that were in them the whole time, but just hadn't come out in a while. So I'm going to turn it back over to you guys and give you 4 minutes to come up with all of the genius ideas that I know are bubbling up. 4 minutes. Again, and come back together. And as we come back together, I've been noticing you've been having meaty conversations, which is fantastic. And the nature of this conference, obviously, is that we can continue these conversations afterwards. We're leaving lots of time for Q&A, because I know you've all come with different expectations and hopes. So we're going to move on to that in a moment. I think the idea that you leave with one concept firmly planted in your mind is that as we're going through this technologically accelerated development time, and I think we probably will be for a long time to come, understanding what it is to be human, understanding how we work as humans, and then nurturing and shaping us to be the best possible versions of ourselves, I think is really exciting. And I think going back to these basics can be really powerful when we're then thinking about anything that we do in the workplace. So thank you for your attention. I'm Amy Brann, Amy_Brann on Twitter, at Synaptic Potential. If you want any further information, we've got lots of white papers and etc. But should we move to the Q&A, Stella? Thank you, Amy. Thank you.
So what we're going to do now is we're going to invite our 3 speakers up to the table. Within the room, we've got 3 microphones, as I understand it. Have we got a roving mic at the back? Fantastic. So that's for all of you. And we'll just ask you to pose questions to the panel. We've now created a panel. And they will answer. And we've got about 15 minutes for you to ask those burning questions that those exercises, those ideas have created in your heads. So, who's got a question? We've got one over here. Run, Leo, run! It's going to be like,
I have a question about the embodied cognition. So I'm interested in whether or not embodied cognition is also relevant to when you're physically learning something, if that's where it's actually come from. So I'm thinking about, if you're learning something new, like, say, snowboarding, which some of us might be, and you're failing miserably, is that embodied cognition actually something that you would do as a physical thing as much as, reinforcing behaviour for other things?
Yep. So if I answer, Alison, did I answer that question? Yes, answer that question.
Yeah.
So yes, it is. So some of the interest in our learning space has come from people trying to work with STEM subjects, so really complex situations where you can actually then use things like gestures and movement and embodied cognition to help people to understand really complex interactions. But yes, you can also apply it to sport. And one of the things, if you do a bit of reading, and embodied cognition is a really interesting area because it's controversial. So even going, what exactly is embodied cognition, we'd probably all disagree, and certainly all of the academics out there also disagree. But one of the examples that you often read about when someone says, what exactly is this, and you hear it on podcasts and things that you read, is the picture, I don't know the right word for it. When someone...
A metaphor.
No. When you're playing baseball and the batter hits the ball and the ball goes flying and you have to try and catch it. So if I try and give that as an example. So that's an example of embodied cognition, because if you were to only think you were using your brain to do that, if you think about, I don't know enough physics and maths to actually be able to compute the parabola of the ball, how it moved, the speed of it, and so on. And actually what we're doing, we're using embodied cognition to actually catch that. And what happens in practice, we're not doing all of that computational processing in our head. What we're doing is we're using our bodies to catch that ball. And what we do is as the ball's coming towards us or away from us, however we're moving towards catching that, we actually keep a straight line of sight to that ball. And as long as we're not doing that consciously, we're just using our bodies to do that, it's an unconscious processing, as long as we keep a straight line to it, we will end up in the right place to catch that ball. That's an example of us using our body to learn and how to do something.
Fantastic. Another question?
Hello. Hi, I have a question for Amy. You talked about the importance of the environment and making sure that's conducive to setting up for the right behaviours. Have you got some examples of how that's worked for digital learning? Or ideas on how that could work?
I don't have any in-house examples. So what I'm sort of seeing behind that question is an intention to create a digital space that's best for the outcomes that you're looking for?
Well, I guess personally, we haven't put much thought into the environment in which our learners are engaging digitally, and you've made me think we maybe should be doing more about that, but I don't exactly know how we can create a more conducive environment.
With the digital space?
Well, the fact they're going to be taking online learning, for example. There's no face-to-face in some instances.
I think all of the same principles apply then. So all of the insights that you can take from behavioural science in terms of nudging the ideal behaviours. So how do you want someone to be when they're in that learning space? I think you would then consider that with user interface and all of that side of things. And I know it's tricky because a lot of things are sort of off the shelf. But I'd also think about the physical environment that they're still in. So in a lot of organisations that we do see, whether it's learning or whether it's just doing their work, they're sitting in... Who's got open plan? Yeah, everyone went open plan. Not everyone, most people went open plan. And open plan is not the ideal. I can't find a great argument for it being an ideal learning, thinking, using your prefrontal cortex environment, because we know that constant stimulation, constant distractions means that you're effectively task switching repeatedly. So I would be hands up, I would be less concerned whether my user interface looked pretty and more concerned whether my user was actually in a space where they had no distractions, nothing coming into them. Some organizations use like a hat on top of the computer saying do not disturb. Some have got, different green light systems to say when they're busy and when they're not. Other organisations we've worked with have actually gone to having only the disturbing time between 11 and 2, and there's research underpinning what timings you might choose for different activities. So I would still be favouring the external environment having more of an impact on the individual than the user interface. But you could then go into VR as well, which opens up a whole other world of discussions.
Thank you, that's really helpful.
Okay, good.
I'd also just add the emotional and mental environment space as well. Yeah. Another question.
I actually have the same question, just in terms of embodied cognition when learning processes go online. What happens to the embodied cognition part of a learning process? Because I think that's what I find really hard in developing online learning courses.
It's a really great question, actually. So I think I said it when I was speaking with you, one of the things you can think about your animations and how you use the body in that and how you engage people with that, how you can explain things and so on. But also, it's one of the questions that was vexing Laura and I. We were talking about it, for example, even how do you do it with paper materials as well? And there is some interesting work and research and interest around using metaphor. And actually, because metaphor, again, speaks to that non-verbal kind of communication. So it's about thinking about using the imagery and metaphor and other things, and that's how you then get that connection to the body. And then you can move forward with that.
I have a question. So, is that all right, Stella?
Yeah.
So because when we visualise, we're then inhibiting the actions because our neural networks are activating as if we're doing something, for example, basketball practice. So then, when we're visualising, are we having the same embodied cognition?
I think so. Some interesting stuff around visualisation. So there's lots of research done in sport around visualisation, where that if it sounds really dumb, but if you actually visualise lifting something, you can still build strength even though you're actually visualising it. So I don't know exactly, but I imagine that would be the case.
It would have to be.
Yeah.
So even just thinking about something, you'd still be be utilising embodied cognition. You wouldn't actually have to do anything.
Yeah. Any questions from that side before I move back here? No.
So I don't know if this is breaking the rules, but I just wanted to say I've recently taken a course in somatic experiencing and Feldenkrais that was fully online. And the way it is all about embodied cognition effectively. And the way this course was designed, I wish I could say I was the designer. I was not. I was just taking it. But it was to give us very clear instructions, first of all, about the environment and our physical positioning in the environment, and then get us to do exercises. So it's mostly voice-based and with a lot of video as well. And getting us to reflect on what we were doing and capture that. So I think it is completely possible to do that. You miss the face-to-face feedback loops, but you can build a very strong reflective practice with that.
Thank you, really nice contribution. More questions? Got a couple of minutes left. Because if you haven't, I've got loads. Any more questions?
So I teach a class where we train trainers, kind of a train the trainer course, and certify people to teach. So if you could teach people new to the training field one thing that they should do differently based on current cognitive neuroscience research, what would you teach them?
That's a good question.
Let's start with Laura.
Oh my goodness. Right, what would I teach them? I think I would start off with thinking about creating visual. I would go to the Mind Palace and try and get them into creating visual metaphors, because I think that's a very powerful way of embedding learning and helping people to actually connect where they are with what they've learned. So I think it helps a lot with recall. Of course, it depends on the sort of learning that you're trying to embed, but actually I think that's a pretty good place to start. So yes, I would start there.
Alison?
Okay, this is still mine. Thank you. So I would also agree with that. I think I would go with that because it's one of the things that we grapple with a lot with organisations that we work with is how do you help people to make sense of the learning that they're doing, particularly if you're thinking about personalisation or some of those other things we know from neuroscience that's really helpful. So how do you personalise a learning journey when you're blending all sorts of things together, but also help them to make sense of it, to be able to link back to it, to move through it, to remember where they're at, what their learning is, go back to their content. So actually, again, that's why I love the idea of the mind palaces and working with that, because that really helps people to have something that they've still got a representation of it. And as Laura said, because you have such a strong memory for visual representations, you can take that back into the workplace and we'll still remember, hopefully you'll still remember from today, do you know what, we went into the body room and that's where I learned that stuff about embodied cognition. I'm still not quite sure what it is, but I can go with that. So yeah, I would go with that too.
And I would encourage people to prioritise alignment. So I think many of you have probably experienced when you can teach people the most brilliant stuff and they can have the most amazing experience online, face-to-face, however. They can experience all this new information and then they go back into their job and things don't line up. HR are measuring something different, their boss is asking for something else, and all of this amazing stuff that they were like, yeah, I'm so excited about implementing and putting into action, there are competing priorities and all of that good stuff just gets lost. And I think that sets up a really negative feedback loop. So rather than waste everyone's time, I'd look at beforehand, can we get alignment with this? If it's not going to go anywhere, if it's not going to be fitted in, really alignment's the best word I've got for it, then why are we bothering? Because it's not going to work. A bit depressed, sorry.
Fantastic. Right, the rule of scarcity says that if I tell you you've got 1 minute left, which I think is time for one more question, somebody is going to have that perfect question. So who's got one burning question?
It can be a really bad question, dodgy question. We'll take anything.
Otherwise, I'm going to ask one. That's just not fair.
I think we're curious what your one is, Stella.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's quite a simple one. Laura, I've not heard... Amy, I've not heard the phrase hot and cold networks before, so I'm just interested in what you mean.
Oh, so they mirror, they're not the same as, but they mirror Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow networks, so System 1, System 2. There's a whole bunch of different names that different academics have given them. In neuroscience, the research that we've explored in the Behavioural Change Centre are hot and cold.
Fantastic, thank you. That solves my curiosity. I've now got that nice little peak of dopamine floating through my head. Thank you all very much for participating and taking part, and can we give the panel a round of applause?